Hello friends, welcome back to my channel. My name is Amelia and today we're going to be talking about all the books that I read in the month of August. It wasn't really the best reading month for me. I only read 4 physical books and then I also listened to 1 audiobook, although I do still have today and tomorrow, so I'm hoping that maybe I can finish something else in that time, but for the sake of this video, we have 5 books to talk about. Alright, first up I read The Lies of Locke Lamora and I give this a 5 out of 5 stars. Actually, although I didn't read too many books this month, it was a pretty good month for getting highly rated books, so I will give this month that, though even though there wasn't specifically a ton of volume, the quality was really high, so that's probably more important anyway, but I digress. So, Lies of Locke Lamora. This is a really interesting, more gritty type of fantasy. We're set in this city that is quite a bit different from what I would say other fantasy cities usually kind of feel like. We've got these really separated out districts, so the wealthy and all the way down to the really poorest of districts. And they're kind of all in these different islands that are connected by sets of bridges, and there's all different sorts of bridges as well. And it really makes for a very interesting setting because the whole city feels so alive with all the different people and all the different places and connections. And all the description created a really atmospheric setting that I think really served to enhance the story and really ground it in this world so that the things are happening made sense to the world, you know? So we're following our main character, Locke Lamora. And he's interesting because he's not specifically a good person, and the book doesn't really specifically try to make you feel like he is a good person. He is a thief. He's the leader of his little group of thieves, and they're all under the protection group. I don't know, they pay tribute, I guess, kind of to the Kappa, who's in charge of all of the gangs and petty criminals in this city, of which there seems to be quite a lot, so they have quite a big crime problem, I would say. But our gang and Locke, they don't really usually steal from the normal city people. Their real targets are the wealthy, and they've been trained since they were young boys by their former leader, who is now deceased, to pull off these really elaborate heists, despite the fact that they're supposed to follow what's called the secret peace, which was arranged by the Kappa, where they just kind of the soldiers kind of just leave the gangs alone as long as they only steal from the normal citizens and they don't steal from the guards or the nobility. But Locke and their gang's whole shtick is pulling up these really elaborate schemes targeting the nobility, and kind of relying on the fact that the nobility won't tell anybody else because they're embarrassed that they got scammed, and it's been working so far. So Locke and the gang are working on their biggest heist yet when things sort of begin to go wrong for them, for the Kappa, for the nobility, just kind of for the city in general, and we just kind of follow their reactions to this. And I found Locke to be a really interesting character because obviously he's a thief, so he's kind of a bad person, and the book doesn't try to convince you otherwise. It just sort of makes him being a thief. That's just a fact about him, that just happens to be part of his character. Although he does have a very altruistic sort of redemption moment at the end, but it doesn't really specifically come across as oh, don't worry, he was a good character all along. It's he does this thing, but he also kind of does some sneaky thief stuff at the same time. So it's just kind of, that's Locke. It's this thing that he was trying to stop crosses the line for him, so he stays in his lane, as it were. I think the side characters in this book were also quite well done. The whole band is a really dynamic group of personalities that really work together to bounce off each other, create interesting banter and a good reading experience. And then also I would say the descriptions in this book were really good, especially the descriptions of food and stuff, because a lot of fantasy books will be they'll describe food often, but it'll usually just be normal food, normal is our world, which I get because it's easier to explain to people because they already know what a roast chicken is. But while some of the foods did contain elements that were of this world, they always had a little fantastical twist to them that just made them that much more interesting and unique. But I would also say, on the same line, that if you don't like a lot of descriptions in your book, such as with the food, you might find this to be a bit slow because there are quite a few descriptions, but I find it really adds to the world building and the mood and feel of the story when it's okay, I can really picture what's happening, I can see the world around me, and I can feel like that atmosphere. And I really think that it helps to like put the reader into the story so that you're experiencing it more, I guess I would say, as opposed to like just reading on the page. You can experience it in your head as like a visual thing as well, which I really love. So speaking of descriptions and visuals, the next book that I read was The Night Circus, and I gave this one 4.5 out of 5 stars. So Night Circus is an extremely atmospheric tale following a mysterious circus that moves from place to place, seemingly appearing out of nowhere and only opening after dark. But magical as the circus is, it's only a front for 2 magic users, a contest whose stakes are much higher than either of the participants actually realize. I would say The Night Circus is an excellent example of how much you can do with just like great writing and great vibes. It's often described as being a like no plot, just vibes kind of book. And this is definitely true to an extent. There is no like big grand battle that takes place between the magic users or anything, which is, I was kind of thinking that there would be like an actual like fight, but it's actually more like a subtle contest, a display of strengths that develops into meaning something more for the players. The atmosphere in this book was honestly just like on another level. I think that like because the author devoted so much time to it, it really felt like what she was trying to do with this book was like transport the reader to this circus. And honestly, I would really love to go to this circus. Like I feel like somebody should set it up in real life. Like I know a lot of the stuff that they do in the circus is like done with magic, but I feel like with modern technology we could like accomplish like a fair number of these things, and it would be so cool, I think. But alas, I don't think that will probably happen. Also, I read Caraval last year, and now after having read this, I feel like this is what Caraval was trying to be, except that the writing in Caraval was significantly weaker, and then like the plot and the characters were just like not nearly as good as they were in this book, although this book has probably less plot overall, but it's a lot more interesting and it makes a lot more sense to me, I think. In my opinion, if you've been thinking of reading a Caraval, you should just skip it and read this instead. It is a much better execution of not the same concept, but like there are some like ideas that are sort of similar in the like exhibition kind of thing, and also like going for more of like a vibe descriptive kind of sort of setup. But yeah, as we are heading into fall, I definitely recommend that you pick this book up. I think it has big fall energy and that you should grab it. Grab yourself a mug of cocoa, some caramel corn, and settle down for a cozy evening reading this. Next up, we have A Magic Steeped in Poison by Judy I. Lin. I give this one 3.5 out of 5 stars. And this is a YA fantasy set in a Chinese-inspired world where the characters can do magic through tea. And the whole like premise with the magic tea was the whole reason that I picked this book up, because I thought it sounded like an interesting premise that was a little bit more unique than a lot of YA out there, and I like the idea of like, I felt like there could be really good descriptions of like tea magic and the whole like setup. And I did enjoy the magic system and the descriptions of like the tea ceremony and the world, and that I thought all that was quite good. So we're following our main character Nina as she leaves her small town and she goes to the big city because she wants to take place in a competition to choose the new court like tea master. And she's going because she wants to earn the favor from the princess. That's like another secondary prize, as well as being the court tea master. But she wants this favor because her sister has been poisoned by this like menace called the Shadow, who's been plaguing the country. And yeah, so she wants the favor. She wants to borrow like all the best like court physicians and stuff to have them hopefully heal her sister. Her mother has already died from this poison, so it's just her and her sister and her dad. So she's going out to try to save her sister. And I really enjoyed the format of the contest, because I think it created a really good structure for this book to like take place within, and really helped like with the pacing and that kind of thing. And like the culture and politics that she set up around it, I think fit quite well, if not being like not specifically like super in-depth or like intriguing or anything. But there was this like whole deal about like the emperor's brother being this like exiled general, and everyone's like worried that he wants to like come back from his exile and steal the emperor's throne. But like my problem with this was not specifically like that concept, like okay, whatever, fine, somebody wants to like come steal the throne, there's a threat to the kingdom, we have greater stakes coming into play than just like this girl's sister. but I don't remember them ever explaining properly why the general was in exile in the first place. Like, I have no idea what it is exactly that he did, and like I feel like it might have. I feel like there's like a good chance that it was explained at some point, but not in a very like clear way. So a lot of the book I was like confused exactly, like I was like, why is this happening again? I don't know. So I don't know if that's just because like I missed something and I wasn't paying attention, but I feel like that doesn't usually happen to me. So I don't know. I am inclined to say that it wasn't explained very well in this book, because I definitely read a lot more complex books without having this problem. So maybe it was me, maybe it was the book. I would say that it also suffers, although like in a much lesser extent than some books, from a lot of the typical sort of YA downfalls. So for example, our main girl hasn't really had lessons in this like tea stuff. Like she's had a few, like her mother, who was like originally like a tea master, was like teaching her sister. So she's had like a few of her lessons, heard some of her lessons, but like this isn't like what she does. She's not like fully trained in this or anything, but somehow she manages to do well in this competition because, you know, like her magic is just like that strong. So it does have a little bit of that, like the main character is just like magically good at whatever she needs to be. And then there is also the like brooding, mysterious love interest who's like from a higher class, but just seems to be falling in love with the lowly provincial girl. So there's that. And then also like towards the end of the book, it was kind of like there were people who were like trusting her and like acting like they'd known her for years and like trusted her for all this time, where like they had no like real reason to, and it just like didn't really make that much sense. So I was just kind of like, this doesn't feel like super realistic or like grounded. Like there was like one thing that she did that like would help like bring these people over to her side, but it's also just kind of just like, I don't know, I don't think that would be like enough for it to be like, okay, we are relying on you for these really like high stakes things, when she's just like this girl who just like wants to kill her sister and like you barely know. And then of course the main character also suffers from like a really typical YA thing where like she doesn't really have a ton of personality. She's kind of bland. She's just kind of like moody, angry at the world. Also, of course, doesn't realize how great / beautiful she is. You know, the usual suspects. But I did still really enjoy it despite those things. And if you like YA, I think you should pick this one up, especially if those kind of like YA sort of pitfalls don't bother you. I think you would really enjoy this one. And I think I am going to read the second one, so make with that what you will. But I think if you like YA, you will like this one, because it is, I would say, relatively unique compared to some of the other YAs out there. Next up we have An Immense World, which I gave 5 stars. And this is a non-fiction book about like the natural world and the concept of the Umbelt that I listened to as an audiobook. If you're interested at all in animals, like the natural world or science, I think you would really enjoy this book. It focuses on like the concept of the Umbelt, which is like how a creature, animal, whatever you want to call it, experiences the world through like its senses. So like for example, ours includes sight, sound, hearing, smell, and touch, with sight being our primary sense. It explores the different ways animals perceive the world, both with familiar senses, like the ones I mentioned before. So like how a dog would experience the world, like smell first, like that's their primary sense as opposed to sight like in ours. But it also goes beyond this to explore senses that humans, or most humans, can't use. So for example, echolocation, such as the type bats use. There are actually some humans who can echolocate. It's like an adaptation that some blind people can learn to help them like sort of almost hear the world around them so they can navigate better. But then it also goes into senses that no humans like have or could like learn to use, such as like the electromagnetic sense that some fish have, as well as like the birds sort of sense, or like they think that it's almost possible that they can see like the Earth's magnetic field, which is really cool. It definitely met all the criteria that I look for in a nonfiction book. So did I learn something? Yes. I definitely learned a lot of interesting little tidbits about animals. So now I have a repertoire of like animal sense facts that I can disperse at random. Was it enjoyable to read / listen to? Yes. I think the audiobook is a great way to go with this one, because the narrator was very dynamic. He seemed very animated and interested in the topic. And this one may be more pertinent just for me, but I think other people could use this metric as well. But does it keep me from getting bored while running? Yes. This book contained a lot of interesting little tidbits and facts, and it really kept me engaged while I was listening to it. And also like the way that it was structured meant that it was really easy to just sort of leave off wherever I was when I finished running and easily pick back up when I started, just because it was structured into like, there were some like smaller segments, so it was easy to jump out of and then jump back into. So yeah, I highly recommend this book if you are looking for an audiobook and if you are interested at all in animals. And finally, I read Fool's Errand by Robin Hobb. I give this one 5 stars, and it's the first book in the Tawny Man trilogy, which comes after both of the Farseer trilogy and the Live Ship Traders trilogy. So in this book, we are back again with Fitz and Night Eyes about 15 or so years after the events of the Farseer trilogy, and they are living out on their own in this remote cabin. They don't want anything to do with the Farseers or the realm. They just left that life behind, and they're wanting to enjoy their peaceful life with their adopted son, Hap. But of course, this can't last. They start to get some visits from people from their past, and Fitz starts to feel a little bit antsy again, you know, like the outside world is calling. Eventually, they are whisked away from their cabin when Prince Dutiful goes missing only weeks before his diplomatic betrothal, and Fitz's abilities with the skill, which is like a type of magic in this world, are their best hope of finding him in time. So this book starts off quite slow, really establishing like the tone that Fitz and Night Eye's life has sort of had these years, a slow sort of life that, you know, follows the changing of the seasons, all that kind of lovely jazz. And we start to see Fitz's sort of desire, longing to be in the outside world again, slowly start to grow at like the same time that we kind of begin to understand that Night Eyes is not the young wolf that he used to be. Like, it's been 15 years, he's quite an elderly wolf at this point. I would say that maybe it's a bit too slow in the beginning, but it does really get across that sort of like feeling of like longing for change, but like being stuck in your current like condition. Once we get going, things really picked up for me. Definitely the best thing about Hobb's writing, like everybody knows this, I feel like, or at least people who have read Hobb, is that her character work is just like so good, and her relationships, and I really enjoyed being back and like experiencing Fitz's really sort of complex and in-depth relationships with both Night Eyes and with the Fool. I really enjoyed seeing Fitz's like qualms about how he dealt with things at the end of like Farseer, and like his moral musings on like everything that happened in that trilogy and like how things played out. Once we leave Bookkeep, the plot definitely starts to like pick up the pace a little bit as we're like traveling, trying to find this prince. But yeah, if you're used to things that are like really snappy, this still might be a bit slow for you, because Robin Hobb does like to spend a lot of time like inside her characters' heads exploring what they're thinking, and as real people do, their thoughts sometimes, you know, drift off, go on a little bit of a tangent. And while it does usually make sense for like the story, and it's usually like related to like stuff that's going on, it does add a lot of length. So if that's not something you think you would enjoy, just be warned. I was initially thinking of rating this more like 4 stars, like as I was reading it, but when I got a bit more towards the end, this thing happened that like I knew it had to happen because I've read the final trilogy. I read it out of order, so I know this thing had to happen. But when it did happen, it just like hit me so hard. Robin Hobb has a really sort of like poetic and, I don't know, really like touching way of writing sad things that like they feel really sad, and they really get to me in a way that no other author has ever been able to do. Like Hobb just like knows how to make a girl feel things, and even though it's like sad and it made me sad, like just like she does it in such like a good way where it feels really meaningful, and really, I don't know, it doesn't feel like it's just like she's trying to make you sad for the sake of making you sad. It's like this thing has to happen for the story to make sense, and it's going to be sad, and you're going to feel a lot of things. But I think that's part of what makes this book so good, is what really made it a 5 stars for me, even though it genuinely did make me cry. Yeah. Which, this is only the second book ever to make me cry, and the first one is also a Hobb book. So just be warned that there's a sad part at the end, but I think that it makes sense for the story, and it's worth it. It makes the book so good because of how impactful the scene is. So yeah, that is the final book that I read this month. I highly recommend you read it. But a pretty good-ish reading month. Not good for quantity, but definitely good for quality. And I think that's probably more important, and I still have 2 days, so I might see if I can finish another book. I'm kind of hoping that I might be able to finish off Great Hunt. I have, let's see, I have just a bit over 200 pages left, so maybe I can finish it. I don't have high hopes because I do also have a shift work tomorrow, so we'll see, we'll see. It's not the end of the world if I don't finish it. But that is all the books that I had to talk about today. So thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time.